My stepdaughter tried to destroy my life and chose her real mom, who traded her for $5,000. Now she's calling me crying because her life turned upside down? I married Rick when Olivia was 3 years old. Her birth mother, Denise, was this disaster of a person who disappeared for months at a time and only showed up when she needed money. She'd been arrested twice for theft and once for assault. When Olivia was 4, Denise signed away her parental rights in exchange for Rick not pursuing back child support. We agreed never to tell Olivia about Denise because why would you tell a child their mother traded them for $5,000? So I raised her. I was at every soccer game, every piano recital, every parent-teacher conference. I taught her to ride a bike in our driveway. I held her when she cried about mean girls at school. I paid for her braces with my inheritance money. She called me mom and I called her my daughter. When people said she looked nothing like me, I'd laugh and say she got her dad's genes. For 13 years, that was our life. Then last month, Denise shows up. Olivia's 16 now, and Denise somehow found her on Instagram. Starts messaging her about how she's her real mother and I stole her away. Tells her all these lies about how Rick and I prevented them from being together. Olivia confronts us at dinner one night, holding her phone with all these messages. Rick tries to explain, but Olivia's already decided we're the villains. She starts meeting Denise secretly. Olivia starts calling me Laura instead of mom. She tells her friends I'm her stepmother who's been lying to her. She moves all her photos of us off her wall. But here's where it gets interesting. Denise doesn't just want a relationship with Olivia. She wants Rick back. And she starts using Olivia to get to him. Has Olivia leave her phone around with messages visible? Has her talks about how lonely her real mom is? How Denise never got over losing her family? Olivia starts picking fights between Rick and me. Dad, Laura's trying to control me again. Dad, Laura said I can't see my real mom. Dad, don't you think it's weird how Laura pretends I'm hers? Rick starts defending Denise. Says maybe we were too harsh. Maybe Olivia deserves to know her real mother. Maybe Denise has changed. I'm watching my family fall apart and then I find them. Rick and Denise, in his car in our driveway. He's kissing her. I stand there watching them through the kitchen window and something in me just goes cold. I did not confront them. I go upstairs and start making lists. The house is in my name. I bought it before we married with money from selling my dad's business. Rick's name isn't on the deed. His car? I paid cash for it but put it in his name for insurance reasons. The vacation house we go to every summer? Mine. Inherited from my grandmother. Olivia's college fund? That's interesting. It's in my name as the account owner. Rick and I had been putting money in, but I'd been adding extra from my consulting work. About $80,000 extra. Olivia's car she got for her 16th birthday 2 months ago? I bought that. Title's in my name until she turns 18. The credit cards Rick uses? All authorized user cards on my accounts. The next morning I call my lawyer. Then I call my accountant. Then I call a locksmith. Rick's at work when the locks get changed. Olivia's at school when I clean out her college fund and put it in a new account. I leave the original $20,000 Rick contributed, but take every penny I put in. I canceled Rick's cards and removed him as an authorized user on all of them. I texted him that he needs to find somewhere else to stay tonight. He calls me, screaming about how I can't lock him out of his own house. I remind him it's not his house. Never was. Olivia comes home from school and tries her key. It doesn't work. She calls Rick crying, and he tells her to go to Denise's apartment. That's when she learns Denise lives in a studio above a liquor store with no heat and roaches everywhere. She texts me, "You can't keep me from my home." I text back, "Your dad can find you somewhere to live. I'm sure your real mom has room." Rick tries to withdraw money from what he thought was our joint account. It's empty. I moved everything to my personal account. He calls me, screaming that I can't take his money. I remind him that every deposit came from my consulting firm. Olivia tries to drive her car to school the next week. The repo company already took it. She calls me sobbing, saying I stole her car. I tell her the car was never hers. It was mine that I let her use. Now she can ask her real mom for rides. I tell her, "You wanted your real mom. Now you have her. Enjoy everything she can provide for you." 3 weeks later, Rick tried to claim common law marriage. His lawyer called on a Tuesday morning while I was making coffee. The guy introduced himself as Charlie Larson and started talking fast about how Rick had rights to marital property and common law marriage, and how I couldn't just lock him out. I listened to him go on for maybe 2 minutes. Then I gave him Faith's phone number and hung up while he was mid-sentence. My coffee was still hot when my phone rang again. Faith was laughing so hard I thought she might be crying. She kept trying to talk but couldn't get words out, just these gasping sounds between laughs. Finally, she managed to tell me that common law marriage hasn't been a thing in our state since 1991. Even if it was still legal, Rick would have to prove we presented ourselves as married to other people, which was impossible since we actually got legally married 13 years ago. The whole claim was so stupid, Faith couldn't believe a lawyer actually suggested it. She said Charlie must be desperate for billable hours, or Rick lied to him about our situation. I didn't really care which one it was. I went to work and buried myself in spreadsheets for a healthcare client who needed their billing system completely rebuilt. Numbers made sense in a way people didn't anymore. Jeremy noticed I was staying until 9 or 10 every night. He'd bring me coffee around 7 and take over the smaller client accounts without me asking. He never said anything about it, just handled things so I could focus on the big project. My phone buzzed one afternoon with a text from a number I didn't recognize at first. Then I saw the message was from Olivia asking if I could bring her winter clothes because Denise's apartment was freezing, and she only grabbed summer stuff when she left. I read it twice, took a screenshot, and sent it to Faith with a note about documenting Olivia's living conditions. Then I blocked the number. Faith sent Rick's lawyer a formal response the next week. She told me it was 15 pages of case law and statutes explaining exactly why Rick had no claim to anything I owned. She included a complete list of every asset in my name with documentation showing I bought or inherited each one before the marriage, or with my own money during the marriage. The only thing Rick could legally claim was his personal stuff and the car I stupidly put in his name for insurance reasons. Faith said Charlie would probably tell Rick to drop it and focus on the actual divorce instead of wasting time on claims that would get laughed out of court. 2 weeks after I changed the locks, Rick showed up at my office. Security called me from the lobby saying a man named Rick Winters was asking to see me and should they send him up. I walked to my window and looked down at the parking lot. I could see Rick standing by his car, the one I paid for. He looked terrible. His face had stubble like he hadn't shaved in days. His shirt was wrinkled, and even from 5 floors up I could see something desperate in how he stood there looking up at the building. I told security to escort him off the property, and watched them walk him back to his car. He got in and sat there for a few minutes before driving away. I met with Faith at her office that afternoon. She had divorce papers ready and said I should file first instead of waiting for Rick to make a move. Filing first meant I controlled the narrative and the timeline. I signed everything she put in front of me. My hand didn't shake at all. Faith filed the papers the next morning and had Rick served at the motel where he'd been staying since I locked him out. She sent me a photo of the signed service receipt. Elena Patton called my cell phone 3 days later. She was Olivia's school counselor, and my number was still listed as the primary emergency contact. She told me Olivia had missed 4 days of school in the past 2 weeks. When Olivia did show up, she seemed tired and distracted, not like herself at all. Elena sounded worried and wanted to know if everything was okay at home. I told Elena that Olivia chose to live with her birth mother, Denise, and I wasn't her guardian anymore. I gave Elena Denise's contact information and address. Elena got quiet for a second, then asked if I was sure about this. I said I was completely sure and ended the call. I went back to my spreadsheets but couldn't focus. Jeremy knocked on my office door an hour later. I was on a video call with the healthcare client and I snapped at them about something small, some detail in their data that didn't match up. The client looked surprised, and Jeremy stepped in smoothly, saying we'd follow up with a detailed report tomorrow. After the call ended, Jeremy sat down across from my desk and asked what was going on. I gave him the basic facts without any emotion in my voice. My husband cheated with his ex. My stepdaughter picked the other woman over me. I kicked them both out of my house. Jeremy nodded and said I could take time off if I needed it, and I told him I didn't need time off. I needed to work. I signed up 2 new clients that week, both big healthcare companies that needed help with their data systems. Jeremy looked surprised when I told him I wanted both accounts, but he just nodded and sent me the files. I worked until midnight every night that week building out a business expansion plan that would need 3 new hires and a bigger office space. The numbers filled my head and kept me from thinking about other things, like how Olivia used to fall asleep on my shoulder during movies on Friday nights. Faith called me on Thursday morning while I was reviewing budget projections. She told me Rick's lawyer was pushing hard for spousal support, claiming Rick had been a stay-at-home dad for part of the marriage and deserved compensation. I pulled up my files and reminded Faith that Rick worked full-time at the insurance company for the last 8 years making decent money. Any support claim would be tiny and temporary at best, maybe a few months of minimal payments. Faith agreed and said she'd shut that argument down fast. The next day I got an email from Rick at 6 a.m. The subject line said, "Please read this," and I almost deleted it without opening it. But I clicked it and read the whole thing. He wrote about how he made a terrible mistake, how Denise had manipulated him, how he wanted to come home and fix our family. He said he loved me and always had, that Denise meant nothing, that he would do anything to make this right. I read it once, sitting at my kitchen table with my coffee getting cold. I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no sadness, no hope. Just empty. I forwarded the whole email to Faith with a note saying, "For the divorce file," and went back to my expansion plan spreadsheets. On Saturday, I was scrolling through my phone during a break from work and saw that Denise had posted new photos on Instagram. Her account was public, so I could see everything. The photos showed her and Olivia at some mall, both of them smiling big and holding shopping bags from expensive stores. The caption said, "Best day with my girl," with a bunch of heart emojis. I looked closer at the photos. Olivia was wearing the same gray hoodie and jeans she'd been wearing in every photo for the past 3 weeks. The shopping bags looked empty, just props for the camera. The whole thing was fake, staged to make their life look better than it was. I took screenshots and sent them to Faith without any comment. The property appraiser showed up at my house on Monday afternoon. I had to leave work early to meet him there. He was an older guy with a clipboard who walked through every room taking notes and measurements. I followed him through the house I'd bought with money from selling my dad's business. We went through the living room where I'd picked out every piece of furniture, the kitchen where I'd chosen the countertops and backsplash, Olivia's bedroom where we'd spent a whole weekend picking out the perfect shade of purple paint for the walls. She'd been 12 and so excited about redecorating. I stood in her doorway watching the appraiser measure the windows and felt something crack inside my chest. Just a small crack, a tiny break in the cold wall I'd built. I shut it down hard, turned away from the room, and walked the appraiser back downstairs. Faith called me that evening with another update. Rick was now claiming he'd contributed to the house value through home improvements and maintenance over the years. He wanted credit for increasing the property value with his work. I went to my file cabinet and pulled out every receipt I'd saved. I had documentation for every major repair and improvement. New roof in 2019, paid for by me, installed by a contractor. Kitchen renovation in 2020, paid for by me, done by professionals. New HVAC system in 2021, paid for by me with a check I could prove. Rick's contributions had been basic stuff like mowing the lawn and changing light bulbs. I scanned every receipt and emailed them to Faith. Jeremy cornered me in my office the next day and suggested I should talk to someone. He knew a therapist named Alexis Roberts who worked with people going through hard times. I told him I was fine, I just needed help managing my stress levels. He gave me Alexis's number anyway, and I made an appointment for Thursday because Jeremy wouldn't stop bugging me about it. Alexis had an office downtown in a building with lots of windows. She was younger than I expected, maybe 40, with kind eyes that made me uncomfortable. I sat in her office and told her the basic story. Husband cheated, stepdaughter picked the other woman, I kicked them both out. I explained I wasn't there for therapy, just for stress management strategies. Alexis listened without judging me or trying to fix anything. Then she asked me one question that I couldn't stop thinking about later. She asked what I would want Olivia to know if Olivia ever asked me to explain everything. I didn't have an answer. Faith called me 3 weeks after I'd changed the locks. She said her investigator had been following Denise and had some concerning information. The investigator had photos of Denise taking Olivia to bars with her at night. In the photos, you could see Denise going inside the bars while Olivia sat alone in the car waiting. The timestamps showed 11 p.m. on a school night. There were multiple photos from different nights, always the same pattern. Denise would park, go inside, leave Olivia in the car for an hour or more, then come back out. I looked at the photos Faith emailed me. Olivia looked small and tired sitting in that car in the dark parking lots. I told Faith to document everything and keep investigating, but don't take any action yet. Part of me wanted to call CPS right away and report Denise for leaving a minor alone at bars. But another part of me, the cold hurt part, thought Olivia had chosen this life. She'd picked Denise over me. Maybe she needed to really understand what she'd chosen. Faith called again the following Monday with news about Rick. He'd lost his job at the insurance company. His boss had fired him for missing too many days and showing up late when he did come in. Rick's lawyer had called Faith to inform her, trying to use the job loss as proof that Rick needed higher temporary spousal support, since he had no income now. But Faith pointed out that losing your job for poor performance actually hurt Rick's claim that he'd been a stable provider during the marriage. The whole thing was falling apart for both of them. 2 days later, Elena called my cell phone during my lunch break. Her voice sounded different this time, more worried and less professional. She told me Olivia had missed 10 days of school in the past 3 weeks and was failing 3 classes. The school had tried calling Denise over and over, but the number just went to voicemail every time. Elena asked me directly if I knew what was going on with Olivia's living situation, because the attendance office was required to file a truancy report if things didn't improve. I thanked her for calling and said I'd look into it, then hung up and stared at my computer screen for 20 minutes without moving. That evening, I told myself I was just going to drive past Denise's building to see what the area looked like. I left work around 6 and drove across town to the sketchy neighborhood where Denise lived above the liquor store. I saw Olivia sitting on the concrete steps outside the building wearing a thin hoodie even though it was only 40 degrees outside. She had her arms wrapped around herself and was staring at her phone. I slowed down as I passed and our eyes met for just a second before I looked away and pressed the gas pedal. My hands gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white and stayed that way until I got home. Faith called me on Friday afternoon and said she needed to meet with me about Rick's discovery requests. I went to her office after work, and she handed me a thick stack of papers. Rick's new lawyer, Charlie, was demanding copies of all my business income records for the past 15 years, documentation of every inheritance I'd received, statements from all my bank accounts, and proof of how I'd paid for the house and vacation property. Faith explained that Rick was trying to claim I'd used marital funds to pay for things I said were mine separately. I took the papers home and spent the entire weekend going through my file cabinets. I found the deed to the house showing I bought it 2 years before marrying Rick with money from selling my dad's business. I found the will from my grandmother leaving me the vacation house. I found 15 years of bank statements showing deposits from my consulting firm into accounts that only had my name on them. Every receipt for the new roof in 2019, the kitchen renovation in 2020, the HVAC system in 2021. I'd paid for everything with checks I could prove came from my accounts. By Sunday night, I had 3 boxes of documents organized and labeled, and each piece of paper felt like proof of everything I'd built that Rick now wanted to take. My therapy session with Alexis on Tuesday was harder than usual. She asked me why I was punishing myself by refusing to check on Olivia. I told her I wasn't punishing myself. I was protecting myself from getting hurt again. Alexis just looked at me with that expression therapists have when they know you're lying to yourself. She asked me what I was afraid would happen if I helped Olivia now. I didn't have a good answer, so I changed the subject to talk about work stress instead. Jeremy caught me in the break room on Wednesday and told me something interesting. One of our clients had mentioned seeing Rick at a job interview last week at an accounting firm downtown. The client said Rick looked awful, unshaven and wearing a wrinkled suit and seemed desperate during the interview. But then Rick started complaining about his crazy wife who stole everything from him and kicked him out for no reason. The client said he felt bad for Rick at first, but after hearing him blame everyone else for his problems, the client lost all sympathy. Jeremy asked me if I was doing okay and I said I was fine, just busy with the divorce stuff. The letter from Charlie arrived on Thursday in a fancy envelope with a law firm return address. Inside was a settlement offer. Rick would accept $50,000 and walk away from any claim to the house, vacation property, retirement accounts, and business assets. Faith called me after I emailed her a copy and said it was actually a reasonable offer when you considered how much court costs and legal fees would add up over the next year. She said I should think about it carefully because sometimes it's worth paying something just to be done with the whole mess. I told Faith absolutely not. Rick didn't deserve a single penny after what he did. He cheated on me, let his daughter treat me like garbage, and now wanted money for assets he never contributed to. I'd rather spend $100,000 on lawyers than give him $50,000 he didn't earn. That same week, Denise started posting Instagram stories that showed up in my feed because Olivia was tagged in them. The posts were all about how hard single motherhood was and how she was struggling to provide for her daughter. She posted pictures of their cramped studio apartment and an empty fridge with captions about doing her best with limited resources. The whole thing was so obviously designed to make people feel sorry for her and send money. I noticed several of Rick's relatives commenting with sad face emojis and messages of support. His sister wrote that Denise was such a strong woman for taking in Olivia when her stepmother abandoned her. I blocked all of them and deleted the app from my phone. Faith called me the following Tuesday with news from her investigator. The guy had been watching Denise's apartment building and had some concerning information to report. Denise's boyfriend Corey had moved into the studio apartment about 2 weeks ago. The investigator ran a background check and found that Corey had a criminal record, including 2 charges for domestic violence against previous girlfriends. Now there were 3 people living in a space meant for one person. Faith asked me if I wanted her to do anything with this information, and I told her to just document everything and keep watching. Part of me knew I should call CPS right away, but I couldn't make myself do it yet. I woke up at 3 in the morning from a nightmare where Olivia was calling my name and I couldn't find her. I got out of bed and walked down the hall to her bedroom. I hadn't been in there since the day I changed the locks. Her soccer trophies were still lined up on the shelf above her desk. Piano recital programs were pinned to a bulletin board on the wall. There was a framed photo of the 2 of us at the beach house from last summer, both of us smiling and sunburned. I sat on her bed in the dark and looked at all the pieces of the life we used to have. The room smelled like her strawberry shampoo, and I stayed there for over an hour before going back to my own room. Elena left me a voicemail on Thursday morning while I was in a client meeting. I listened to it during lunch and her voice sounded genuinely worried. She said the school was legally required to report Olivia's truancy to family court if the absences continued. She'd tried reaching out to Denise multiple times with no response. Elena said she knew this was a difficult situation, but she was asking me to please call her back because Olivia had mentioned to the school counselor that I was the only mother she'd really known until recently. I saved the voicemail and sat in my car in the parking lot trying to decide what to do next. I called Elena back that afternoon from my office. She picked up on the second ring and I explained everything without sugarcoating it. Olivia rejected me for her birth mother who abandoned her as a toddler. I raised her for 13 years and now she was living with Denise in terrible conditions, but that was her choice. Elena listened quietly, and when I finished she was silent for a long moment. Then she told me that teenagers make awful decisions all the time, but that doesn't mean the adults in their lives should abandon them too. I thanked her for her concern and ended the call before she could say anything else that might make me feel worse than I already did. Faith called me the next morning while I was reviewing a client proposal. She scheduled our divorce mediation for 2 weeks out and warned me that Rick would probably bring Denise for emotional support. I needed to be ready to see them together without losing my cool in front of the mediator. I told Faith I could handle it and made a note in my calendar with the date and time. The mediation was scheduled for a Thursday morning at the mediator's office downtown. Jeremy stopped by my office later that day and offered to come to mediation with me as a support person. He said he'd taken time off work before for court stuff with his ex, and he knew how hard it could be to face that alone. I appreciated the offer but told him no. I needed to prove to myself that I could handle this without anyone holding my hand. After work, I drove to the nice department store across town and bought a new suit for the mediation. Navy blue wool, perfectly fitted, expensive. It felt like armor when I tried it on in the dressing room. The salesperson told me I looked powerful, and I paid with my credit card without even checking the price tag. My therapy session with Alexis that week focused entirely on mediation strategies. She taught me breathing exercises for staying calm when I felt angry or upset. We practiced responses to things Rick might say to try to get under my skin. But mostly Alexis helped me figure out what I actually wanted from this divorce versus what my hurt and anger wanted. I wanted it over quickly and cleanly with no ongoing connection to Rick. My anger wanted to make him suffer and beg and admit what he'd done. Alexis reminded me that I could only control my own actions and reactions, not his feelings or behavior. The night before mediation, I couldn't sleep. I kept going over everything in my head and checking that I had all my documents organized. Around 11, my phone rang from a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. Olivia's voice came through small and scared, asking if I was still awake. She told me Denise and Corey had a huge fight earlier that night. The neighbors called the police and officers came to the apartment. Olivia was sitting in a diner 3 blocks away because she was too scared to go back there. The diner was one of those places that stays open all night, and she'd been there for over 2 hours. She didn't have any money for food, and she had nowhere else to go. Her voice shook when she said she'd tried calling Rick first, but he didn't answer. I sat in my car in the driveway for 10 minutes with my keys in my hand. Part of me wanted to drive straight to that diner and bring her home. The other part knew she needed to understand the full weight of what she'd chosen. I told her to stay at the diner and I'd send her money for food through a payment app. She needed to keep trying to reach her father because this was his responsibility now, not mine. Olivia started crying on the phone. She said Rick was staying in a motel room with someone he worked with, and he'd told her earlier that week he couldn't have her there. Then she asked me in this broken voice if I hated her. I told her the truth. I didn't hate her, but I couldn't be what I was to her before. That person didn't exist anymore because she destroyed that relationship when she chose Denise and helped wreck my marriage. She cried harder and I felt something crack inside my chest, but I didn't take it back. I opened the payment app on my phone and sent Olivia $40 with a message. For food and a ride to somewhere safe. Figure out where that is. Then I turned off my phone completely and went inside. I took a sleeping pill from the medicine cabinet because otherwise I knew I'd get in my car and drive to that diner, and I wasn't ready to do that. I needed to protect what was left of myself first. Mediation day arrived and I put on my new navy suit like armor. The mediator's office was in a building downtown with bland conference rooms and cheap coffee in the waiting area. Rick showed up 20 minutes late with Denise right next to him. She had the nerve to smile at me like we were old friends meeting for lunch. I looked at her once and then looked away. The mediator called us into the conference room and started explaining the process. I interrupted and told the mediator that Denise wasn't a party to this divorce and needed to leave immediately. Rick tried to argue that she was his support person, but the mediator agreed with me. Denise had to wait in the lobby, and the mediator quickly decided to put Rick and me in separate rooms so we wouldn't have to look at each other while negotiating. The mediator came into my room 20 minutes later carrying a yellow legal pad with Rick's demands written out. Faith sat next to me at the conference table while the mediator read through the list. Rick wanted the vacation house that my grandmother left me in her will. He wanted half of my retirement accounts that I funded entirely from my consulting income. He wanted ongoing spousal support for 5 years. He wanted one of my cars even though he already had the vehicle I bought him. Faith didn't say anything while the mediator talked. She just slid a folder across the table with copies of property deeds, account statements, and inheritance documentation. The mediator looked through the papers for about 10 minutes, making notes on his pad. Then he asked if Faith wanted to make a counteroffer. She told him no counteroffer was necessary because Rick had no legal claim to any separate property I owned before the marriage or inherited during it. The mediator nodded and said he'd go present that to Rick. Faith leaned back in her chair after he left and told me this was going exactly as she expected. Rick was trying to use the mediation to pressure me into giving him something just to make it go away. She said we'd sit here all day if needed because she got paid either way. The mediator called for a break after another hour of going back and forth. I walked out into the hallway to use the bathroom and saw Denise standing by the water cooler on her phone. She had her back to me and didn't notice me come out of the conference room. I heard her tell whoever was on the phone that once Rick got his settlement, they were moving to Florida together. She laughed and said something about beach weather and starting fresh somewhere new. I stood there for a second watching her plan out her future with money she thought Rick would get from me. Rick was sitting in his conference room down the hall actually believing she loved him and wanted to build a life with him. I almost felt sorry for him right then. Almost. But then I remembered him kissing her in our driveway, and I walked past Denise to the bathroom without saying anything. The mediation ended 3 hours after it started with no agreement reached. Rick wouldn't accept that he wasn't entitled to my property, and I wasn't giving him anything beyond his clothes and the car already titled in his name. Faith packed up her files and told me we'd be headed to court now. She said it would cost us both money and legal fees, but the outcome would be the same. I'd keep everything, and Rick would get nothing except maybe a few thousand in temporary spousal support if the judge felt generous. We walked out together, and I saw Rick standing by his car with Denise. She had her arm around his waist and was talking to him quietly. He looked defeated and angry at the same time. I got in my car and drove home without looking at them again. I turned my phone back on after I got home and found 12 missed calls from Olivia. There was a voicemail from 2 hours earlier. I sat in my car in the garage and played it. Olivia's voice sounded tired and flat. She said she went back to the apartment after staying at the diner. Corey was gone, and Denise was acting like nothing happened the night before. She said Denise told her the police thing was no big deal and Corey would be back in a few days. Olivia asked if I was still mad at her. Then the message ended. I saved it and forwarded it to Faith as documentation of the living situation. Then I went inside and made dinner for one. 2 days later, I got an email from Elena at Olivia's school. The subject line said truancy notification. She wrote that she was formally filing a report with family court about Olivia's attendance. Olivia had missed 15 days so far this semester and was failing 3 classes. The email was professional and included all the official language about court procedures and parental responsibility. But at the bottom, she added a note that wasn't part of the formal notification. She wrote that off the record she hoped I would think about what was best for Olivia beyond the hurt between us. I read that line 5 times before I closed the email. Then I called Alexis and asked if she had any emergency appointment slots available. Alexis saw me that afternoon in her office downtown. I sat in the chair across from her desk and tried to explain why I needed to talk right then. But as soon as I started talking about Elena's email, I started crying. Not quiet tears, but actual sobbing that I couldn't control. I told Alexis about changing Olivia's diapers when she was 3, and Rick was working double shifts. About teaching her to read by going through picture books every night before bed. About holding her after her first breakup with a boy from her freshman class. About how none of that mattered when Denise showed up with her lies and her Instagram messages. Alexis handed me tissues and waited until I could breathe normally again. Then she asked me one question. She wanted to know what I was afraid would happen if I helped Olivia now. I sat there trying to come up with an answer that made sense. Finally, I told Alexis the truth. I was scared that if I let Olivia back into my life, she would just choose Denise again. That I would open myself up and start caring again, and Olivia would decide her real mom was better after all. That I would have to survive that rejection twice, and I didn't think I could do it. Alexis wrote something in her notebook and asked me if I thought Olivia understood what she lost now. I said I didn't know. Maybe she did. Maybe she was just scared and alone and looking for any way out of Denise's apartment. Alexis told me I didn't have to decide anything right now. I could sit with these feelings and figure out what I actually wanted, versus what my hurt and anger wanted. Faith called me 3 days later with an update on the divorce. Rick's lawyer withdrew from the case. Rick hadn't paid him in 6 weeks and couldn't afford to keep him on. Faith said Rick was now representing himself, which meant everything would take longer and be messier. People representing themselves always dragged things out because they didn't understand court procedures or filing deadlines. She said we should expect the divorce to take at least another 4 months now instead of wrapping up in 6 weeks. I asked if that changed anything about the outcome. Faith said no. Rick still had no legal claim to my property. It just meant more court dates and more paperwork. My phone buzzed while I was on the call with Faith. A text from Olivia came through with a photo attached. I opened it after I hung up and saw her report card. 3 Fs in English, math, and history. An AD in science and a C- in art. The text below the photo just said, "I'm sorry." Nothing else. No explanation or excuses. Just those 2 words. I stared at the message for a long time trying to figure out what she was apologizing for. Sorry for failing. Sorry for choosing Denise. Sorry for helping destroy my marriage. Sorry for calling me Laura instead of Mom. I didn't respond to the text. Instead, I saved the screenshot and added it to the folder I was keeping of everything related to Olivia's situation. The next morning, I called Elena at the school. I asked her what resources they had available for students in crisis situations. Elena sounded surprised to hear from me, but answered right away. She told me about counseling services and academic support programs. There was a tutoring center that could help Olivia make up missed work. There was a social worker who could connect her with community resources. But then Elena said something that made my stomach hurt. She said all of those things required stable housing and parental support to access them. A student living in an unsafe environment couldn't focus on schoolwork, no matter how much tutoring they got. I thanked Elena for the information and told her I'd think about next steps. She said to call her anytime if I wanted to discuss options for helping Olivia get back on track. I hang up with Elena and sit at my desk staring at nothing. The tears start before I realize I'm crying. I put my head down on my folded arms and just let it happen. I don't hear Jeremy come in until he's sitting in the chair across from my desk. He doesn't say anything for a minute. Then he starts talking about his daughter Rachel. How when she was 15 she told him she hated him and wished he wasn't her dad. How she ran away twice and lived with her boyfriend's family for 3 months. How he had to decide whether to force her to come home or let her figure out on her own that the boyfriend's mom wasn't actually better than him. He tells me he chose to stay her dad even when she didn't want him to be. He paid her phone bill so she could always call. He showed up at her school events even when she told him not to. He sent her birthday cards to the boyfriend's house. And eventually she came back. Not because he forced her, but because she realized he never stopped being her dad. Jeremy stands up to leave and says sometimes being a parent means doing the right thing even when it hurts like hell. I drive to the family court building the next morning. The clerk at the records window finds the truancy filing and prints me a copy. She tells me there's a hearing scheduled in 2 weeks. She explains that if Olivia's situation hasn't improved by then, the judge could order her into foster care. Neither parent is providing adequate supervision according to the school's report. I ask what adequate supervision means. The clerk says stable housing, regular school attendance, basic necessities. She looks at me over her reading glasses and says the system doesn't like to split up families, but sometimes there's no choice. I fold the papers and put them in my purse. I sit in my car in the parking lot for 20 minutes before I can drive. That night, I lie in bed staring at the ceiling. I keep picturing Olivia in some stranger's house, sharing a room with other foster kids, going to a new school where nobody knows her. I think about her first day of kindergarten when she cried and held onto my leg. How I walked her to her classroom and stayed until she felt safe. I think about teaching her to swim at the vacation house. How scared she was of the deep end until I held her and showed her she could float. I roll over and look at the empty side of the bed where Rick used to sleep. Some part of me is still her mother. I raised her for 13 years, changed her diapers and made her lunch and helped her with homework. She called me mom. That has to count for something even if she doesn't call me that anymore. I can't let her go into foster care. I just can't. I text Olivia at 7 in the morning. I tell her I'll help her, but there are conditions. She has to admit that Denise lied to her about me keeping them apart. She has to commit to going back to the school every single day. She has to accept that our relationship will never be what it was before. I tell her to think carefully before she responds because I won't make this offer twice. I put my phone face down on the kitchen counter and make coffee. I don't let myself check for a response. 3 hours later, my phone buzzes. Olivia's message is long. She admits Denise lied about everything. That Denise told her I prevented them from being together when really Denise chose money over her. She says living with Denise has been awful. The apartment is freezing and there's never enough food. Denise's boyfriend Corey scares her. Denise drinks all day and brings home different men at night. She says she understands if I never forgive her. She knows what she did was terrible. She knows she hurt me and helped destroy my marriage. But she's asking anyway. She's asking if there's any way I can help her because she doesn't know what else to do. I read the message 3 times. Then I text back. I tell her she can move into the vacation house temporarily. Not my main house, not her old room, but a place where she can be safe and go to the school. I'll pay for food and basic necessities, but she needs to get a part-time job within a month to learn responsibility. She'll do her own cooking and cleaning. She'll check in with me by text every day. She'll see a therapist every week. If she breaks any of these rules, she's out. I hit send before I can change my mind. Faith calls me that afternoon after I text her about the plan. She warns me this could complicate the divorce. Rick could claim I'm providing for Olivia, but not him. He could argue that proves I have extra money to share. I tell Faith I don't care what Rick claims. I'm not doing this for him or because of him. I'm doing it because Olivia is still a child who needs an adult to be the adult. Faith is quiet for a second. Then she says okay. She'll handle whatever Rick's lawyer tries to pull. She tells me I'm doing the right thing even if it makes the divorce messier. I drive to Denise's apartment the next day to pick up Olivia's things. The building looks worse in daylight. Cracked concrete steps, broken window on the second floor, graffiti on the door. I climb the stairs and knock. Denise answers wearing a stained tank top and sweatpants. Her eyes are red and unfocused. She smells like alcohol and cigarettes. She looks at me and laughs. She says I'm stealing her daughter. I look at her for a long moment. Then I tell her she sold her daughter for $5,000 16 years ago. I walk past her into the apartment. Olivia is sitting on a mattress on the floor. There's no other furniture except a broken chair and a card table. Olivia has almost nothing to pack. Most of her clothes are still at my house where I locked her out. She's wearing jeans that hang loose on her hips and a sweatshirt with a stain on the sleeve. She's lost weight. Her face looks thin and tired. Dark circles under her eyes like she hasn't slept in weeks. I hand her a cardboard box I brought from my car. She takes it and just stands there holding it. Then she starts crying. Not quiet tears, but big gasping sobs. She drops the box and covers her face with her hands. Her whole body shakes. I stand there watching her cry and something in my chest hurts. Denise yells from the other room about how I'm ruining everything. I ignore her and pick up the box. I start putting Olivia's things in it myself. A few shirts, some school books, a hairbrush. That's all there is. I drive Olivia to the vacation house. Neither of us talks. She tries to apologize twice, but I tell her we're not doing this in the car. We'll talk when she's settled and we've both had time to think. She nods and looks out the window. I can see her reflection in the glass. She's still crying, but quietly now. just tears running down her face while she stares at the trees going past. The drive takes 2 hours. I focus on the road and try not to think about the last time we drove to the vacation house together. That was different. That was before everything fell apart. I pull into the driveway and turn off the engine. Olivia looks at the house and more tears come. I get out and grab her box from the back seat. I unlock the front door and walk inside without waiting to see if she follows. The vacation house smells like dust and old wood when I flip on the lights. I walk through the living room and point out the fireplace that actually works if she needs heat. The kitchen has a small stove and a fridge that hums too loud. I open cabinets to show her where the dishes are. 2 bedrooms down the hall. I point to the smaller one and tell her that's hers. The bathroom is between them. I leave $300 cash on the kitchen counter and tell her to buy groceries and whatever else she needs. I write my number on a piece of paper even though she already has it. I tell her I'll be back in 3 days to talk about how this is going to work. She nods and doesn't say anything. I leave without looking back. Faith calls me the next morning while I'm making coffee. She tells me Rick found out about Olivia being at the vacation house. He's threatening to file for custody to get access to my property. I actually laugh. I tell Faith to let him try. Any judge will see his motel room and his unemployment and laugh him out of court. Faith agrees but warns me to document everything anyway. I meet with Elena Patton at the school 2 days later. Her office has motivational posters on the walls and a box of tissues on her desk. I explain the new arrangement. Olivia is staying at my vacation house. She'll be going back to the school. Elena looks relieved. She tells me she's glad Olivia will be in a stable place. She agrees to help Olivia make up her missed work. Then she warns me that Olivia will need counseling to process everything that's happened. I tell her I'm already working on that. 3 days later, I drive back to the vacation house with a list I printed out. Olivia answers the door looking cleaner than she did when I dropped her off. The house is neat. She bought groceries. I sit down at the kitchen table and slide the paper across to her. School every day, no exceptions. Therapy once a week with someone I'll arrange. Part-time job within a month. She'll do her own cooking and cleaning. She'll text me every single day to check in. If she breaks any of these rules, she's out. Olivia reads the list twice. She looks up at me and agrees to everything. No argument, no negotiation. Then she asks me if she can ever come back to the main house. I tell her honestly that I don't know yet. I tell her trust takes years to build and seconds to destroy. She nods like she understands, but her eyes get wet. I stand up to leave. I arrange for Olivia to start seeing a therapist who works with Alexis. The therapist specializes in teenagers. The first session happens a week later. Afterward, the therapist calls me with permission from Olivia to share some information. She tells me Denise had been manipulating Olivia for months before they even met in person. Denise built elaborate lies about how Rick and I kept them apart. She sent fake screenshots of text messages. She created this whole story about fighting for her daughter. The therapist says Olivia believed every word because she wanted to believe her birth mother loved her. Rick calls me from a new number 3 weeks into the arrangement. I almost don't answer, but I do. He's begging me to let him see Olivia. His voice sounds broken and desperate. I tell him he can arrange that through Olivia directly. She's old enough to decide if she wants contact with him. I'm not going to be the go-between for his relationship with his daughter. He starts to argue, but I hang up. 2 months pass. The divorce gets finalized on a Tuesday morning. Rick gets nothing except his car and his personal belongings. The judge barely glanced at his requests before denying them. Olivia is passing all her classes. She got a job at a coffee shop and works weekends. She texts me every morning. Short messages, but consistent. I visit her every Sunday for dinner at the vacation house. We cook together. We talk about small things, school, work, the weather. We're learning how to be in each other's lives in this new, smaller, more careful way. Denise violated her lease and disappeared without telling anyone where she went. The landlord called me looking for her because I was listed as an emergency contact on Olivia's school forms. Honestly, we're all better off. Rick got a job in another state and moved away. He sends Olivia texts sometimes. She answers about half of them. I'm dating someone new. A guy I met through work who knows the whole story and respects my boundaries. He doesn't try to fix anything or tell me what I should do. I'm learning that protecting yourself doesn't mean closing yourself off forever. The family I thought I had is gone. That version of us doesn't exist anymore. But I'm building something different now. Something based on honesty and earned trust rather than assumptions and obligations. Olivia will probably never call me mom again. She might never live in my main house again. But she's safe and she's working hard and she's learning that actions have consequences. It's not the happy ending I wanted 13 years ago when I taught her to ride a bike in our driveway. It's not the life I planned when I paid for her braces and went to her soccer games. But it's real, and maybe that's better than the pretty lie we were all living before.